Hi, this is Mark and welcome to my Supabase series. This is video number 1, Introduction to SupaScript. Today we're going to just talk about what is SupaScript, and if you're a JavaScript programmer and you want to write server-side functions for Supabase, which is basically the PostgreSQL, you'll have a good time using Supabase. It makes things much easier. SupaScript is JavaScript basically. It's using the JavaScript V8 engine. It's got some node features, it's got some Deno-like features, and it's running with inside PostgreSQL. So it's got full access to the database, full access to the web. You can do all sorts of cool things with it. Now, first of all, the default language that you're going to be working with in PostgreSQL, if you're not using SupaScript, is PLPGSQL. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it's kind of comes by default with Postgres, and it's not a super familiar language. It's based on SQL, so it's SQL-like. It's not super friendly. I've worked with it a little bit, coming from a JavaScript, TypeScript, C background. It's not super friendly to work with, and it doesn't have a lot of libraries since it's a pretty specific language, and there's not a lot of support for it. Now, that being said, it's not a bad language. It's probably going to be more efficient for working with PostgreSQL, and you don't have to add any other layers or extensions. So it's good in a sense. But if you really want to leverage that knowledge you have of JavaScript and leverage all of the NPM libraries that are out there, you're going to want to check out SupaScript. So just as an example, this is a PLPGSQL function. And for both types of functions, SupaScript or PLPGSQL, you're basically writing functions that are stored in the database. So your code gets stored in the database at the end of the day. So we start everything with create a replace function, the function name, and then you have to pass it parameters with the types. In this case, we're passing an integer and a text message. And then you declare what this function returns. In this case, it returns a text or a string. Up at the top, you declare any variables. This is in PLPGSQL. And then in between the begin and the end statement is your function. If you read through this, you could probably follow it mostly. It's, like I said, it's not super friendly, but it's not bad either. And then at the very end, we declare the language here, which is it's going to be different when we write our SupaScript. But you can take a look at this. It's not too bad, but if you're familiar with JavaScript, you're going to want to use SupaScript. So SupaScript is built on PLV8, which is an extension for PostgreSQL, and PostgreSQL is super extensible, and that's why I love it. It's SQL, it's open source, it's very standard. It uses all the SQL standards, which is really cool. And PLV8 brings the entire V8 JavaScript engine to Postgres. Really great job, the guys who put this together. Now, it could be better, and that's what SupaScript is all about, is kind of tightening up the loose ends. PLV8 doesn't have NPM support by default, so you can't use those cool node require statements that you want to use. You can't leverage all the other code that's out there on the web for free very easily. You could cut and paste it, make other functions, but it's kind of awkward to do that. It's also missing some other key features that that Node has that we're used to, that we're gonna put in by using SupaScript. Okay, so here's a SupaScript function. Again, it starts the same as the other functions. Create a replace function name, and you pass it parameters, and you type your parameters. You say this returns text, and you can return JSON, you can return integers, you can return void. There's a whole bunch of options there. But inside the double dollar signs, you can see our JavaScript function, and this should look very familiar to you. It's standard V8 JavaScript syntax. And then lastly, we're saying this is built in language PLV8, because technically we are writing PLV8. SupaScript is just some extensions on top of PLV8. So that should look pretty familiar to you. You'll get comfortable really fast with it. PLV8 is cool, but it's awkward for accessing data. You have to run through some functions. Passing the parameters is not always super easy. Getting to other server functions can be a little bit difficult. Passing or escaping double quotes and single quotes. And debugging is very difficult because things are running at the server. So if you're running a client application, you can't really see what's happening at the server. But you can if you utilize SupaScript, because we've got some tricks up our sleeves that we'll talk about. Okay, so SupaScript, first of all, adds the require statement back into the PLV8 functions. And so not only that, it has the ability to load them over the web. So all you need is a URL to the code, to the JavaScript code, and you can call that library. Where do you find these URLs? If you're in GitHub and you're looking at a library, you're going to look for those script statements that allow you to call the library from inside the browser. Those typically work, whether they're minified or unminified. Usually the unminified versions work a little bit better for this, but you can try both. So basically what's happening, if you see the example code here, we're saying require mylib equals require, and then we're passing it a URL, and then you just start using the library mylib.doSomething, and you pass it parameters, whatever you have. So what's happening here is we're going out to the web, grabbing the source code of this, saving it to a table, so we're caching it later. So it's only going to go out to the web the very first time. After that, it's calling it right from your database, and since this is working in the context of the database, it'll be super fast. And then it gets even faster because once it reads it from the database, it can save it in memory to use it over and over again. So you can pass an extra true parameter after the URL, and it will say, this is a function that I want to use all the time, so preload it when you preload the PLV8 engine, and so it's ready to go. So you want to do that with functions that you're going to be using all the time, not just on a onesie-twosie basis. Getting to the database is done through the SQL function, which we've added, which is basically you just call the SQL function and pass it some SQL. As simple as we could possibly make it. So you can say, in this case, SQL select star from people, and then that will return a JSON object or a JSON array of records that you can loop through and do whatever you like with. You can manipulate them, send them somewhere else, do whatever you like. It's super simple. In addition, here's another example in the code. If you look down at lines 5 and 6, we're passing a SQL statement here, and we can use $1, $2, $3, and then pass an array of parameters to those variables, and that makes it super easy. You don't have to worry about escaping double quotes if you're passing strings, if you're passing objects, or in this case integers. They get sent, and the SQL statement gets built automatically, and so you don't have to worry about escaping things, which sometimes can make your code pretty hard to read. So very simple. There's full documentation in the GitHub library on how to use the SQL statement. In addition, you can call other functions that you've created in SupaScript and saved, or functions that you've created in PGSQL. You can also write functions just in SQL, but those can all be called directly from SupaScript with the exec command. So you could just say exec and then pass it as a string the name of a function you want to call, and then if that function requires any parameters, you pass those as an array. So in this case, we're passing 3 parameters to the first function, a string, an integer, and then a Boolean. And you can pass objects, you can pass whatever the function requires. So it's pretty straightforward for that. And so that allows you to build up your library and call other functions from other functions, call functions from functions. In addition, we have a built-in require for HTTP, since this is a really popular one. We wanted to make this very similar to working with Node. It's actually even a little bit easier than working with Node. But you just say const HTTP equals require HTTP, and then you can call any of the common HTTP methods. You can call get, post, put, delete, all of them, and they're all documented again in the GitHub repo for SupaScript. And one other addition is if you're posting things or saying using put, you can pass it an object instead of having to encode all the parameters. We let you just put together an object, and it can be, nested objects, it can be strings. However, this is a pretty simple example. Name is Bob and age is 2, but we take that and server URL encode it and take care of all the nasty stuff behind the scenes. So this is easy to work with. Also, take a look at the documentation for this in the SupaScript repo, because you can also pass headers, which is really cool. And we have an example in there of sending headers to do basic authentication, but you can do any types of authentication, sending any headers you need for security purposes or whatever you need. Very easy to do with this library. And we tried to make this as transparent and as simple as possible. And then we get to debugging. And debugging is, again, a difficult thing to do since this is running on the server, and you're typically calling this from a client application with the Supabase RPC, remote procedure call method. So what we've done is we've added console log statements to SupaScript, which you can pass anything you want to them. You can use console log, console warn, console error. You can set timers. Take a look at the documentation, but it's basically almost anything you can do with console log. And what we're doing with those console logs is we're writing them to a table in Postgres. But then if you include a small library, we have a SupaScript console library, it's very small, that you include into your client application. It allows you to use the real-time functionality of Supabase to get the results of the results of those console log statements, which are written to a table, in real time into your browser in the browser console. So this should look familiar to you. You're in Google Chrome. You've got your developer tools open. You're looking at your console, and you're seeing all of your console log statements from your client application. But now you can also see all those console log outputs from your server-side functions, and here they are. They're all color-coded. They look nice, and you can pass objects. Here's an example. The red one here we're sending it code 42, so that's an integer, and then the message can be a string. You can send it. The one above has an item that you can drill down, which is a complex object that you can look at. So basically you can pass it anything, and these happen in real time. So if you're in your client application and you click a button, that button calls a remote procedure call or a function on the server that's going to run at the server, and you're going to get the console log output in real time right to your console, your debugging console, which is very cool. And then what we also do is we write a details object with each one of these console log statements that you can click on and drill down and see the full content. In this case, the details show the content. In this case, it was a warning message. It was a warn statement. You can see the log type was warn. The ID of the database record where it's written to, the process ID the server was running, the query it came from, the schema it came from, what schemas the user had loaded, whether the user was authenticated or not authenticated. All that information is available, which makes debugging really, really slick when you're writing these server-side functions. Your workflow really increases when you can see this stuff in real time. So this has been an introduction to SupaScript. This is part of the Supabase series, and in our next video we're going to talk about how you can get started writing SupaScript and what it takes to get it installed and all of that fun stuff. Thanks for coming. This is Mark.